Hi, I'm Mark, and on this channel I talk about UK politics and Brexit from an outside view, although I do know the UK from the inside as well. But even today, many Brexiteers repeat in the comments under my videos that the Brexit from the referendum was never implemented. Well, apart from the fact that the referendum did not even vote on the type of Brexit, what they mean by this is the so-called hard Brexit, and that means the trade only under WTO rules. And since this keeps coming up, I would like to remind you today what these people actually want. The World Trade Organization, the WTO, acts as the normative backbone of global trade. It provides a multilateral framework that aims to prevent discrimination between member states and promote fair competition. WTO rules laid down in the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT or GATT, and other agreements cover a wide range of issues from tariffs to non-tariff barriers to intellectual property protection. And there are core principles of the WTO, for example, the most favored nation treatment. Every WTO member must grant the same terms of trade to all other members, and this means that a tariff reduction granted to one country must automatically be extended to all other WTO members. And there's the national treatment. Foreign products and services must not be treated worse than domestic products once they are imported. And there must be transparency. WTO members are required to make their trade policies transparent and to publish information about their laws, regulations, and procedures. And there's the prohibition of quantitative restrictions. Quantitative restrictions on the import of goods, such as quotas, are generally prohibited. These have been, what I said, the principles of trading if you trade only under WTO rules. WTO rules have significantly liberalized international trade and contributed to the growth of world trade. They offer companies a certain degree of legal certainty and enable them to offer their products and services on global markets. Despite their importance, the WTO rules also have their limits. The increasing complexity of international trade, the growing importance of services, and the challenges of the digital economy present the WTO with new tasks. In addition, the WTO is repeatedly criticized, especially by developing countries, who believe that the rules are too influenced by the interests of industrialized countries. And while the World Trade Organization, the WTO, provides a solid framework for international trade and provides basic rules, bilateral or regional trade agreements can in many cases offer additional benefits and enable deeper economic integration. But why are the WTO rules often not enough, even if the Brexiteers only want them? Those rules are deliberately general to ensure the broadest possible application. However, they cannot take into account the specific needs of individual states or sectors. And international trade is subject to constant change. New technologies, changing consumer habits, and global challenges, such as climate change, often require more flexible and specific regulations than those offered by the WTO. While effective, WTO dispute settlement procedures can also be lengthy and complex. Trade agreements often offer faster and more flexible mechanisms for resolving trade disputes as well. And trade agreements can lead to even closer economic cooperation by eliminating tariffs, reducing non-tariff barriers, and harmonizing rules for investments, services, and public procurement. Through bilateral negotiations, states can agree on specific rules tailored to their particular needs and interests. For example, certain sectors or products can be given preferential treatment. And trade agreements often offer more comprehensive investment protection rules, which means greater legal certainty for companies and encourages investment. And trade agreements can strengthen political trust between partner states and lead to closer cooperation in other areas, such as research and development or environmental protection. And trade agreements can also contain provisions on new topics, such as digital trade, e-commerce, or artificial intelligence, which WTO rules do not yet cover. And trade agreements often provide their own mechanisms for resolving trade disputes, which are usually faster and more flexible than the WTO dispute settlement procedures. And trade agreements can also send a strong political signal and deepen relations between partner countries. The EU is an example of very deep economic integration, which is further deepened by numerous trade agreements with third countries. For example, we have CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, and the CETA agreement between the EU and Canada is a modern free trade agreement that goes far beyond traditional issues and also covers areas such as investment, services, and regulatory cooperation. The TCA doesn't do that. Or we have the USMCA. The USMCA agreement between the USA, Mexico, and Canada is an example of a regional free trade agreement tailored to the specific needs of the North American economy. Despite the many advantages, there is also criticism of trade agreements, of course. For example, they can lead to discrimination against third countries that are not part of the agreement, which is to be expected, to be honest. In addition, the complexity of trade agreements can lead to increased bureaucratic burdens, but usually they reduce them. But trade agreements can be a valuable complement to the WTO and lead to deep economic integration, as I said, and they offer the opportunity to negotiate specific rules that are tailored to the needs of partner states and usually lead to greater economic cooperation. However, the potential benefits and disadvantages should be carefully weighed, and the decision whether to conclude a trade agreement depends on the specific circumstances and objectives of the states involved. That's why they take quite a while. But there are also other aspects of international trade we must not forget, and those are, for example, the non-tariff trade barriers which can be removed. In addition to tariffs, there are a variety of non-tariff trade barriers such as technical regulations, government procurement practices, and the so-called voluntary export restrictions. And these can affect trade just as much as tariffs. And regional economic integration projects such as the European Union or the NAFTA successor USMCA create free trade zones and facilitate trade between their member states without those barriers. Developing countries often have difficulty reaping the benefits of international trade, though. The lack of infrastructure, low production capacity, and lack of diversification of export goods are some of the challenges they face. And the political tensions, geopolitical interests, and national security concerns can significantly affect international trade, and there once again those agreements come in place again. For example, the CETA agreement that goes far beyond a lot of other trade agreements we've seen is indeed one of those places where a lot of those problems are eliminated. And the same thing applies to the United States, to Mexico, and to Canada with the USMCA I mentioned earlier. They can, they have quite an evolved relationship now with regards to trades, because that is also the reason why others, like the African Continental Free Trade Area, took this as a role model. This is now an ambitious project designed to facilitate trade between African countries, and this represents also an important step towards the economic integration of the whole continent. That's why those are role models, and I don't understand why people don't want to be part of it. Because international trade is a complex and dynamic system, and while the WTO provides an important framework for trade, the bilateral agreements will be a useful complement. And the choice of the appropriate instrument depends on the specific circumstances and objectives of the states involved, but they really need to have a look at it. And that's the reason when all the Brexiteers say we want a Brexit and trade under WTO rules, at the same time they're demanding trade agreements with the USA, with India, etc. And that will have the same effect as a trade agreement with the EU. For all of them, Britain is a third country, and all of them have the same interest of protection of their markets. There will be no cherry picking in any of those negotiations. The best examples are the Australia and New Zealand free trade agreements that already are there. They are worse than anything any other country would have agreed with those two countries. I mean, if you want to have a lot of fun, put the New Zealand trade agreement the British have next to the EU-New Zealand trade agreement and compare them. And in the end, why do you want to have trade agreements with the other side of the planet where you will have the same obligations you have to follow as with a trade agreement with the EU now in the TCA? But the EU is the market right in front of your doorstep where most of your companies are trading with. And you want to get out of there and get less beneficial trade agreements with countries somewhere else. But that's why I put that up again, what WTO means. And nobody, in the end, wants to trade just under WTO rules. That's why there are so many negotiations about trade agreements all over this planet. And that's why the EU has so many trade and cooperation agreements all over the planet. The Britons just left all those treaties. In the end, it was more than 700 treaties they left. Nevertheless, if you want to know more, the next video is right here on the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.